Hello, everybody. We are the Solar Commons team in the Bring Your Own District use case for the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. There we go. We are actually a slightly larger team. We have two different groups, one where the engineering division, mostly located on the University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus, as well as the anthropology and social science side that is located on the University of Minnesota Duluth campus. And our mentors are Professor Catherine Millen, as well as Professor Uwe Kortschaken. And so first up, kind of just a little bit of background on our problem. So why are renewable energy solutions important? Well, the United States annual energy statistics show that we, as the United States, consume about 3.5 million kilowatt hours of energy and produce about 6 trillion kilograms of pollutants. And solar energy is one of the many renewable energy solutions that can help drive down the total emissions of the United States, and where it's some solutions such as solar energy is minimally invasive, accessible to most, as well as a wide range of mounting applications for this. And so our project goals, the University of Minnesota is expanding its renewable energy resources, and currently the university produces 27% of its total energy in renewable resources. But only 1% is actually university produced. The rest is outsourced to the local energy provider. An average of 252,000 metric tons of CO2 was emitted in 2021 alone by the University of Minnesota. And its overall carbon neutrality goal is the year 2050. And how we'll do this is setting up a larger solar array with including a 500 kilowatt system for a solar commons, which will be discussed right after this, and an overall payback period of less than 12 and a half years.
So Solar Commons, the reasons and beliefs for using a Solar Commons. Solar Commons is a new form of community solar. It takes solar savings from a host and puts them in a community trust that can then distribute them to underserved communities. Instead of a standard power purchase agreement, we use a Solar Commons trust agreement. We use a digital dashboard that lets all parties to the agreement view and govern the flow of Commonwealth. Our plan would have the University of Minnesota share their solar savings with the Indigenous communities on whose lands they lie, with the hope of eventually expanding the project to all 5 U of M campuses. This framework makes solar energy a vehicle not only for ecological repair, but also for reparative justice and community wealth building. Solar Commons, on the next page. Solar Commons use public art as a form of community engagement. This particular mural is from a successful Solar Commons project with an elementary school in Tucson, Arizona. Our proposed partner at the University of Minnesota Duluth campus is the Fond du Lac tribe of Ojibwe, specifically their food sovereignty programs to help increase access to affordable and ecologically friendly traditional food systems.
So next up is our project proposal. So our project proposal covers 3 major design aspects. First, the panel and array design, which will optimize for solar energy production, as well as comply with any building, electrical, and fire safety standards and codes that may come up. The electrical design, where we utilize existing infrastructure for the system connections, as well as optimize energy storage to reduce the overall demand charge of the university. Finally, the financial design is used to minimize the overall payback period of the system, as well as create a steady revenue stream to the Solar Commons Trust.
On the panel design side of things, we were really interested in optimizing annual production instead of like panel efficiency. And so as we were optimizing, we learned that our electrical load is much too high to actually support to be really useful for solar, because we performed a re-op load analysis and it recommended that we would hit between 20 and 25% of the electrical load. However, we weren't able to do that using standalone arrays. Instead, we decided to cluster our arrays, as you can see on the graph on the left, and that is essentially to use some buildings like solar farms to support the electrical load of another building. Similarly, the U already has a couple of smaller array projects on campus, and so we decided to use the same panel and inverter selection as they do to make implementation and maintenance as seamless as possible. As you can see, this is a lovely aerial view of the University of Minnesota East Bank campus, which is where our district is located. And as you can see, there are very few open areas on campus. And so we weren't able to look into doing some sort of ground mounted systems. Similarly, there aren't a lot of car lots available in this area, so that made doing carports less of a feasible idea. So we are looking almost primarily at rooftop solar design. As I mentioned, we decided to cluster a couple of our buildings together, and you can see one such cluster here. Pike Hall, which is the building in the top left, is the building whose electrical load is getting supported, and then the other two buildings, along with the array on top of Pike Hall, both go to meet a total of just under 20% of the annual load of Pike Hall. And I'm going to go through these are the remaining clusters. This is Territorial Hall. These are our dorms on campus. Johnston Hall, Rapson, Laurel, and Ford, and then last but not least, the Wiseman Art Museum. And this one actually has an uninhabited building of a pedestrian bridge. And so that's really nice because the International Building Code and International Fire Code do not require any walkways on those kind of buildings. And so we're actually just able to coat the whole thing in solar panels. This is actually only a third of the bridge that we included in our models, so it can be very nicely expanded.
Right, so the electrical system was modeled on OpenDSS and MATLAB to determine all the areas of risk. Overall, we minimized overvoltages in the system by reducing how many buildings can be connected to one transformer. We determined that no more than 2 buildings can be connected to one transformer to reduce the impact on the grid. Additionally, a one-line diagram was created to show the wiring layouts of each subsystem, as shown with the Lind Hall cluster here. From the heat maps, we saw that most of the clusters were just above the hosting capacity. So to improve the hosting capacity, we can use battery storage, which is already modeled, and volt-watt inverter control. So the U of M campus has a very extensive underground tunnel system, which we can use to our advantage. The tunnels between clusters can be used for the interconnections. However, Pike Hall and Weissman do not have tunnels in between them and will need additional construction. So one big constraint is distance between buildings. This is a very big issue with the Pike Hall cluster. Pike Hall is around 900 feet away from the distribution array on Elliott Hall, which is longer than NEC recommendation between PV and load. So the longer distance means there's a higher voltage drop and a lot more power loss, so less overall output. And to help with this, the voltage relays can be used to keep the voltage stable at the long distance. All batteries will be mainly used for peak shaving on the supported buildings. There is some risk involved with the usage of battery systems. Batteries will be overused in peak months and underused in off-peak months, according to the SAM model. On the right shows the lack of use during the month of December for the Territorial Hall cluster. This results in battery degradation as the battery is not cycling during the time. Battery operating temperature is another risk. Some of the larger batteries will be placed outside, which in Minnesota temperatures could lead to more unforeseen battery degradation and cell loss. With the high load of the buildings on campus, the batteries will be able to charge at any time and discharge when the load exceeds system output. Depending on the cluster, ideal battery capacities range from 320 kilowatt hours to 2064 kilowatt hours. And our chosen battery model is fully self-contained and hosts its own battery management system, as well as a fire suppression system, allowing for the selected battery to be placed in building penthouses or outside, depending on the size of the battery.
So looking at finances, can everybody hear me? Awesome. Looking at the finances, the University of Minnesota is a little bit atypical as far as solar project financing goes. And so we really had to talk to the university as well as find the best financial structure for them. In our case, all of the generated energy will be used on site, so that changes things financially because we're not using any sort of net metering, as well as our utility provider charges through one mass meter for the entire campus. And so looking at the peak demand charges and that statistic, we decided to model our utility rate as a single 16 cent per kilowatt hour rate. The two financing options that make the most sense are a power purchase agreement or an upfront purchase by the university, because they can handle that the additional load of running that. And so if you look at some of the metrics of our system, we have a system total size of 3.8 megawatts, a construction cost per watt of $1.60, utility rate of about 16 cents, and a yield of 1,002 kilowatt hours per kilowatt. The system performs well, even with PPA financing. Again, an upfront purchase means the university takes back more profit at the end of the day, but we model with power purchase agreement financing because we don't know how they would do it. And so that was a more conservative assumption. And so going off that assumption, the aggregate project cost is $5.5 million, an IRR of 9.7%, net present value of $560,000, a payback period of 9 years and 7 months. And this is for the whole system and not any of the subsystems. And 30-year savings of about $11.3 million, and that's after payback. And so some key takeaways are that there's a better payback IRR and savings through a direct ownership and development by the university, but there's still a nearly 300% return on investment for the university over 30 years. Next slide. So this just shows that each subsystem performs well individually. Here are each of the 8 subsystems, as well as the whole system and the Solar Commons Trust subsection below that. Each subsystem supports the consumption of one of those buildings, as Kate had mentioned. The minimum IRR is 8.76%, and the maximum payback period is 11.1 years. And this is for the worst performing subsystem of subsystem 5 of Tate and Morrill Halls. But it still performs fairly well comparatively. Lastly, the Solar Commons Trust subsystem is going to bring a consistent revenue stream to the Fond du Lac Ojibwe community. And this is going to amount to a 25-year total donations after paying the system itself off from the savings it generates of about $1.7 million donated. And then this was also taken out of one of the larger subsections that we had, subsystem 4, in which case it has a decently high performance and a yield of 1058 kilowatt hours per kilowatt. Next slide.
Well, finally, our development plans for the project itself. And so each cluster design will take about 5 months to complete at an optimal timeline, with the actual longest task being material arrival to the site. Unfortunately, due to the nature of the University of Minnesota as a research university, we are not able to shut down the entire university in order to have these solar installations at one time. So we are suggesting a phased approach to the university in order to meet all of the different university installation demands, as well as keeping the campus open for students and researchers. And we wanted to finish on a quote by former President Barack Obama. "The path towards sustainable energy sources will be long. America cannot resist this transition. We must lead it." Thank you.